1. Can't sleep right now, and I have been thinking about the night my grandpa died. I was 9 years old and was living in the Philippines at the time. It was late in the night, and I was wide awake. The light overseeing the small courtyard of my home was shining bright. It was there to discourage any thieves from entering our house. That said, every inch of the courtyard was clear as day, and I am not exaggerating. It was very well lit. My grandpa had the keys to the front gate. My father allowed him to raise his chickens in our massive backyard. Grandpa would raise about 20 chickens for the purpose of entering them in fights. Every so often, my grandpa would open the gate late at night. I would hear his footsteps walking by my room, his sandals dragging against the cement ground, then onto the dirt path by my room. Sometimes, when I'm wide awake, I'd go by the window to say hello and wave at him, and he would often walk by my window and would give me a chocolate bar, then tell me to never tell Mom about the candy. Cavities. He never liked being blamed for causing cavities in my teeth, and my sister's teeth. I remember, I can never forget, I will never forget, the day he died. There was no dream, no gut feeling, nor was there any hair-raising vibrations in the air. All I felt that night was excitement in seeing my grandfather. I woke up, I sat up, my body and soul as awake as day. I recall sitting up, as I often do when I awake in the middle of the night. I would often sit on my bed and stare out at the courtyard, waiting for sleep to carry me back into a deep slumber. I recall sitting straight, looking at the bulb that lit up the courtyard from my room. Then I hear footsteps, sandals by the front gate. It was Grandpa, I thought. The gate makes a metallic sound. I remember, it was unusually quiet. Usually the sound would be ear-piercing. Then the sandals walk closer to my room. I stand up and walk toward the window. As I walk closer, I notice something. There were footsteps, but no Grandpa. I stood there confused, my eyes following where the sound should be. The sandals dragging close to my window, never slowing, just a gradual speed. The sound of the footsteps grazed the outside corners of my room, sandals sliding on cement, then sandals sliding on dirt. Next thing I hear is the gradual decrease of flip-flop sandals walking away towards our backyard. I wasn't afraid, but I was utterly confused. At that moment I could not comprehend what was happening. The thought of ghosts never popped into my head at the time. I went on my bed, sat up, and waited for sleep to come. The next day I woke up with the thought of the night before lightly in the back of my head. 9-year-old me was still trying to scientifically figure out what the hell that was about. Food was ready in the kitchen, and I was en route towards the comforting smell. On my way there, my dad grabs my arm and pulls me to him. He tells me Grandpa died last night. Heart attack. The most fascinating thing was that he died on another island. I was floored to the ground. Time for me at that moment stopped because my mind just couldn't believe what happened the night before. I wasn't saddened. I was too shocked. I was shocked at the very idea that there are things on this earth that may exist, and we have very little proof but for our own experience to prove them. Fast forward a few days later, and I was no longer shocked but crying at his funeral. This is a true story. Say what you will, but I did not dream this whole sequence. I have always doubted the ideas of ghosts and all other supernatural things, and still do to this very day. But what leaves me open-minded is what I experienced that night. It is one of those memories that can never be erased from my mind. I often look back at that memory, and I can only feel baffled by it. Of course, memories can be accidentally altered through scientific reasons, but I am certain that this piece of my memory is as good as the day I experienced it. I leave this experience here for you all to judge or discuss about. I do understand that some or all of you may not believe me, but I do not care. My experience is my experience. For now, I shall go back to bed. Do any of you have similar experiences? 2. I'd like to introduce myself as half a skeptic. I'm definitely always looking for more rational explanations to strange events taking place. This happened about 7 years ago, and it makes a good 80% of the reason why I firmly believe in the paranormal, since no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't find a rational explanation for this. I live with my family in a house that was built by my great-grandfather during the 1960s. It's in the countryside. No people walking around or talking after 12 a.m. Only us and our cats. Nobody else has ever lived in this house since it was built from scratch by my grandfather and some workers he hired. No one ever died in here. At the time of the event, and still to this day, it was my grandparents, my great-grandma, my mother, and I in the house. I was about 12 or 13 at the time. I was sleeping in the downstairs. My grandparents were in their bedroom at the end of the corridor, and I was in mine about 20 feet far from their room. I was in my bed with one of our cats sleeping on my legs. I had been in a deep sleep, indeed, as I didn't hear my grandparents getting out of the living room and going to bed, when I woke up for no apparent reason. I didn't feel uncomfortable. I was awake, and I didn't know why. I remember looking around. There was a bit of light from the streetlight down the road coming through the window, and as I moved a bit, my cat started purring. I just put my head back on the pillow and the blankets back over my head and waited for myself to fall back asleep. When after something like a minute, I hear a voice whispering, "Mama." Mom in my native language. It was coming from right in front of me, and I could tell it was quite close, and coming from about the same height of where my face was. Not less than 3 feet off the ground. My bed in the downstairs is quite tall for some reason. My cat seemed to hear it, and he immediately stopped purring. Then, whatever the thing was, whispered again, "Mama." And then a third time. Then it stopped. It was always the same tone and always the same voice, but it sounded slightly different. Just like when you're repeating yourself, with the same tone and all, but of course your intonation won't sound identical every time. I got an intense feeling of dread, especially because I knew my cat heard it too. Indeed so, I couldn't even convince myself. It was just in my head. I couldn't move, and I opened my eyes wide. But I have the habit of covering my head with blankets completely, so I couldn't see a thing. And I'm perfectly okay with it. I think I stopped breathing too for a bit, for how scared I was. Then something like 10 seconds after the voice stopped, my cat restarted purring, and I felt like I could relax again. I fell asleep shortly after. I haven't been able to find an explanation for it through all these years. I was the youngest in the house at the time, and I still am. No children dying. There were a couple spontaneous abortions, and years ago. But they took place at hospitals. I even got to think it could have been some weird dimensional glitch. Maybe it was me as a child calling for my own mother, who was sleeping in that same bed. Or maybe it was a future child someone will have. Like me with a possible wife, or my aunt with her boyfriend, calling for their mother. What I know is that it scared me to death. I looked for similar experiences from other people on the web for years, but never found anything. I just can't understand who that voice could have been coming from. How would the ghost of a child get into our house? I've never used a Ouija board or tried to summon ghosts in here. I really have no clue. Any thoughts? 3. Things keep happening in my bedroom recently, every month, and I'm tired of it. Only my bedroom, nowhere else, and it's a brand new place that nobody has lived in before. This past November, I was laying in bed, looking at my phone. I have 2 pretty heavy quilt-like comforters that I sleep with. My ceiling fan was on, but even at the highest setting, it's not enough to move either of these comforters at all. Out of the corner of my eye, and then looking just the right time to actually see it for myself, the edge of my top comforter flips up about 6 inches and falls back down. I was not moving at all, completely alone, and there were no pets in my room at the time. In December, I'm sitting in bed watching a show. One of my dressers was to the left of my bed at the time, but still in plain sight. I had a small cardboard box on top of my dresser with nothing inside. I see the box fly completely off my dresser and onto the floor about 3 feet away, almost into the center of my room. The way I saw it fly would be the exact same way if someone had smacked it off, and it was pretty forceful. At that very moment, I get up, put the box back on the dresser, and start lightly tapping it to see if maybe there was some gust of wind coming from somewhere, like the AC or heat was on, and I just didn't notice. Or if it was just a weird box and something on the dresser made it do that. I was so confused, and I was just thinking about every stupid possibility. Tonight, about 20 minutes ago, I'm laying in bed reading. I hear what sounded like something plastic fall on the floor in my bathroom. My bathroom is very neat, and nothing is sitting on the edge of my sink or near the sink to accidentally fall over. No fan is on. I laid in bed for about a minute thinking about it before I turned on the rest of my lights to go see. As soon as I step foot in my bathroom, I feel chills down my back. What felt like tiny hairs stand up over my body. My heart starts racing a little fast, and I get goosebumps. I go back to my bedroom immediately freaked out, and I didn't even look around to see what had fallen. I've never been scared or had a reaction like that when the other things happened. I was only ever really confused or just really annoyed, but never had a reaction on my body. My television will also randomly turn on in the middle of the night while I'm sleeping sometimes, and the light will either wake me up, or I'll see it on when I wake up if I sleep with a sleeping mask that night. No sound. I have a Roku and my TV will always show the Roku homepage when it's turned on. I know things like that can happen for whatever reason with electronics, but it's pretty new, less than 2 years old. I had to vent. My heart is still beating a little fast. Super weird things that I can't explain have happened since my first incident during high school. So it's been over 15 years now of things happening. But these kinds of things are new, and it's been a long time since the last thing, and that was in a completely different state. 4. I've been haunted for years, and here are some of the things I've had happen to me and my family. Here's some background before I start. My mom's dad was killed in the early 70s in a hunting accident when my mom was 18, about 14 years before I was born. He was shot by a relative who thought he was a deer in a bush while they were pushing deer out to hunt. Well, it wasn't a deer, it was Grandpa, and he bled to death in the woods. A few years later, the night before my mom married my dad, she saw him at the end of her bed in his hunting outfit. My mom asked him a few questions like, "Do you know I'm getting married tomorrow? Do you know Leonard is going to walk me down the aisle?" And he just nodded his head yes. After he was gone, my mom woke my dad up crying and told him what happened. A few years later, in the same house my grandparents lived at, my grandmother remarried my step-grandfather. and he would see a man standing over her at night watching her sleep. He would stand at a 45-degree angle that a normal person would fall over. So he would leave the lights on when she would go out of town. One time, while his family and her were in the living room, his family photo just picked up slowly, turned face down while they watched. Kinda creepy. Well, fast forward. My parents bought my grandparents' house when I was 2, so my grandparents could downsize, and we would have a nice house for me and later my brother in the country. I had my first personal experience when I was about 6. I woke up in the morning, it was light out, and I saw a ghost standing in my doorway. It was just watching me sleep, apparently. I could see somewhat through it, but could make out all the facial features and clothing still. I remember pulling the blanket over my head and just waiting for it to go away. And it did. I slept with the door closed from then on. After that, I would hear someone in my room, moving things around and making noises. My multi-CD player would always turn off and on. It would shut off a lot more if I listened to rap. I don't think it liked that. I would always feel like I was being watched. On really active nights, I would have my brother sleep with me in my room. We pretty much figured it was just my grandpa looking over us. When I was in high school, it was a particularly active night. The air felt heavy, and stuff was moving around while I was still up with the lights on. Usually it was when I was just laying down. While this night, when everything was kind of going crazy, I heard my acoustic guitar strum every string. It wasn't just bumped and reverberating. It kinda got my attention. Not long after, around 1 a.m., I heard the phone ring and the answering machine kick on. My mom's mom had just died, and my step-grandpa let us know. But I kind of had a feeling already that that's why it was so active. She had been sick with cancer. A few years later, after I moved out, my brother was on the floor doing homework, and my mom watching TV. They heard a truck pull in, truck door close, the garage door open and close, and heard someone walk in. And they said hi to my dad because he was in town at the time and thought it was him. But no one was there. One October after that, my dad was pulling out of the driveway for work, and he saw the kitchen lights go off and the bathroom and bedroom lights turn on simultaneously. And it kept repeating, off and on. It was fast enough no one could do that with the switches. It's a good distance apart, and he was the last to leave. So he just took off because, screw that. That was the only time for that episode. After my brother moved out and things kind of died down at my parents', then I began experiencing similar things at my house. The weirdest thing that happened to me there was I had my back to the kitchen counter texting, and the big plastic cup behind me picked up and slammed on the counter really loud. Made me jump. I was like, what the hell? I got out of there and went to class early that day. Then I moved back with my parents for a few months before my divorce was over. Everything started happening again. My same bedroom with stuff moving, doors closing, knocking. I was taking a nap in the late morning, and I heard someone walk down the hall and stop in front of my bedroom. I'm like, crap. I turn over to look, and no one was there, of course, so I just roll my eyes at this point and go back to sleep. Also, one night after work, I got home about 1 a.m. and went to my bedroom and took my gear off. I came back out to the kitchen about a half hour later to grab some food, and the kitchen smelled like gas. One of the stove burners was turned on. I shut it off and opened the windows. I had been home for a while, and my parents were asleep. It wasn't like that when I got home, and there was nowhere for me to bump it. Kind of strange, but nothing crazy. I stopped over the other day to pick up some things I have stored there, and I had to go down to the basement, which I've always felt creeped out by. I heard someone walking around upstairs when I was by myself, so I ran up the stairs to see if I could catch anything there, and no one was there. My mom tells me some things that still happen to her, with the doors and stuff. The place I'm at now, My boyfriend's dad died in it last year, and we moved in to help take care of his mom. While she went down south to stay with his sister this winter, I would hear someone walk around the kitchen or the living room next to our bedroom. There's knocking on the walls. One night something slammed into the side of our bedroom wall next to our bed outside the house. It was so loud it made my dog bark at it. So I grabbed my pistol, I am a police officer, to check the perimeter to make sure no one was breaking in. But there weren't any footsteps in the snow. Weird. But it seemed to slow down when his mom came back from the south. Anyways, hopefully the thing's happening at my parents' is my grandpa, because I never got to know him. But after all this time, if it's him, I'd like him to move on. After growing up with all this, I'm definitely a believer. My boyfriend isn't, and just rolls his eyes and thinks I'm crazy, but I don't think so. I think I'm more sensitive to these things than others, because the majority of things that happened were to me, but enough that my parents and brother believed me. So, that's my haunted life. Hopefully you enjoyed my stories. I have more, but that's enough for now. 5. Hola bambinos. Hope you're all having a wonderful week and that all is well. Grab yourself a cuppa and some snacks, maybe a snuggly blanket, 'cause here we go. Okay, so this is a story my grandmother has told me, and she's convinced something was happening in her old house. My grandmother at the time was living in a small 3-bedroom house in a busy city with my father, uncle, and aunt. She was a single mother and worked her ass off to pay the bills being a nurse at the local hospital. My aunt at the time was a baby, whereas my father and uncle were a bit older and in primary school. They moved into the house and all was normal. I guess everyone has that settling period where you have to adjust to a new layout and make it your home. My nan did her best with the funds she had and made it warm and full of love. A month later, my grandmother kept getting woken up in the middle of the night by sobbing and crying, which sounded female. She assumed it was a next-door neighbor and that maybe this woman was going through a hard time, but decided to just mind her own business. Anyway, this continued and followed a similar pattern, almost becoming habitual, which in turn started to become a thorn in my nan's side, as she had to look after 3 young children and work. She decided to go next door and ask this apparent woman what was going on, not to moan, but to see if she could offer some help and guidance. Knocking on the door, she waited, and a man answered it. She asked about the crying, and he apparently lived by himself with no partner, but also said he heard it too and was getting concerned about the welfare of the person. The man went on to say that he heard it very clearly from the other side of his house, meaning it could potentially have been the house 2 doors down. This man my nan described as a hermit, who very rarely left his house. He had curtains closed almost all the time, and was a bit socially awkward, which will have relevance in just a moment. She thanked him and walked over to the house he suggested. The house was a bit further up the path. Noticing a for sale sign in the front garden, she knocked and waited, but nobody answered. Being curious, she peeked through the window and noticed there was no furniture in there, just an empty shell of a house. A cold shiver passed through her as she very swiftly walked back. The crying continued during the night, to the extent that Nan thought she was losing her mind. She would wake up at exactly the same time every night and hear it. Sometimes it was hushed, other times the volume increased. She would just put her pillow around her ears until it stopped. Things got a bit weirder as time progressed. My aunt, baby at the time, had one of those little silver baby bracelets on. Don't know if it's just an English thing. Nan didn't take it off her. It was a gift from my great-grandma, Nan's mum, and was sentimental. One night, instead of hearing the woman cry, my aunt began crying. This was unusual, as my aunt as a baby was really good at sleeping through the night. Rushing into the room, she hit the light, which slowly flickered on. Again, unusual, the electrics worked perfectly fine before and after this event. When the light eventually turned on, Nan was really freaked out, as the smaller silver bracelet was placed next to my aunt, and she was hysterical. This bracelet was secured by a 2-part latch system. My aunt couldn't keep her head up by herself, and would not have had the strength to undo it. She was also asleep. In the crib as well was a long black hair. Nan had short blonde hair at the time, and my aunt was practically bald. Taking my aunt back into her room to avoid waking my uncle and father up, she had to tend to her for 45 minutes before she stopped crying and fell back to sleep. That night, Nan had very vivid dreams about someone breaking into their house and woke up in a cold sweat multiple times. More odd things would happen, such as things disappearing and then appearing in weird places, thuds when there was nobody there, and of course, the crying. Nan was exhausted and fed up by it, and at this point she had been in the house for almost a year. The final straw was when my father and uncle rushed into her room one night, both as white as a sheet and trembling. They told her that there was a woman in their room. Nan sprung out of bed and rushed in there, but of course found nothing except another long black hair. She asked the boys to describe what she was doing, and they just said she was looking at them and crying. And then she tried to touch their faces, but they ran away. Both the boys slept in her room that night, and a few hours later my aunt was screaming from her crib again. Nan, being Mum of the Year, ran in and just scooped her up without even looking and bolted back to her room. Again, the bracelet was missing. The next day she wasn't working and searched high and low for that bracelet. The obvious place would be in the crib. Nope. She looked in the boys' room and found nothing. A loud thud rang from the room next door, making Nan jump, and waking up my aunt, who was having a nap. Losing her temper, she decided to speak out and said, "Now, whoever or whatever you are, these are my children, not yours. This is my home, not yours. You leave them and me alone. You stop taking things which are not yours, or by the grace and light of God, I will have you banished from this house." Pretty big metaphorical balls of steel. Heading back downstairs, she was shocked when she went into the kitchen and found the bracelet right in the middle of the dining table. After that outburst, my Nan didn't have any other problems. She said she slept like a baby that night and didn't hear anything. They lived in that house for maybe 3 years and then moved on. She said that the third house down was always on the market. New people would move in, but very quickly move out. Just one of those houses that I guess nobody felt comfortable in. The odd neighbour would sometimes talk to my Nan on the rare occasion he was outside of his house, and would ask her if she had heard the woman crying, as he would hear it often. She didn't tell him about her experience, but stated that she no longer heard it. He eventually moved out too. Unsure of the reason, may have been unrelated. I have no idea what or why the crying woman was attracted to my Nan and relatives. My Nan was constantly dealing with death and loss from working as a nurse, and saw many horrendous things during her career. Would it be possible that she might have been more susceptible to something of this nature? Thanks for listening. As always, comments are super appreciated, and I love hearing your comments and views about the subject. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Paranormal Stories, Episode 71. Thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Okay, for those of you who are enjoying the Dracula chapters I've been uploading, I'll hopefully have Chapter 3 ready for you at some point over the weekend. I'm not back to doing it fully on the regular, it's just that I was in the mood to do a bit of additional recording, so I was able to get that done. I had actually only intended to record a few minutes of it, but I ended up, next thing I knew, I was done with the whole chapter, because it's quite an exciting chapter that. There's this wonderful speech in there, where Dracula is talking to Harker, and he basically gives the history of his people. It's like, we CKs have a right to be proud, and so on. It's excellent stuff. So hopefully I'll get that up over the weekend. We'll see. Okay, and with that, I think I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.